He was the quiet kid, the one who sat at the back of the classroom, rarely raising his hand. To his teachers, he was shy but polite. To his classmates, he was a little off. But no one could have imagined that this same boy would grow up to become one of the most infamous serial killers in modern history. Jeffrey Dahmer's story isn't just about the horrific crimes he committed. It's about how a seemingly ordinary childhood, filled with subtle cracks and deepening shadows, became the foundation for a monster. This is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, before the horror began. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. From the outside, his early years seemed perfectly normal. His parents were educated, middle-class Americans, and Jeffrey was their firstborn. But as we'll soon see, what was happening inside the Dahmer household was far from ideal. Joyce, Jeffrey's mother, struggled with severe mental health issues. She was prone to anxiety and depression, and she often clashed with Lionel, who was busy building his career as a chemist. Their arguments filled the house with tension, leaving little room for the warmth and stability that children need to thrive. Even as a young boy, Jeffrey showed signs that something wasn't quite right. By the time he was 4 years old, he had undergone a double hernia surgery, an experience that seemed to mark the beginning of a noticeable withdrawal. His once lively and curious demeanour turned quiet and subdued. Some family friends even described him as emotionally distant. As he grew older, Jeffrey developed an unusual fascination with dead animals. At first it seemed harmless, a boy's curiosity about the natural world. But Jeffrey's interest went deeper. He would collect roadkill and study the bones, dissecting small creatures in the woods near his home. For most parents, this might have been a red flag, but in the chaotic Dahmer household, these behaviours went largely unnoticed. This fascination with death and anatomy became a coping mechanism for Jeffrey. It wasn't just a hobby, it was an escape from the chaos of his home life. By the time he reached adolescence, this fixation had grown into something much darker. By the time Jeffrey was in middle school, his family's dysfunction had reached new heights. Joyce's mental health issues worsened, leading to frequent hospitalizations. Meanwhile, Lionel, desperate to escape the constant turmoil, buried himself in work. Jeffrey, caught in the middle, was left to fend for himself emotionally. Without a stable support system, Jeffrey became increasingly isolated. He struggled to make friends and found it difficult to connect with others. His classmates described him as awkward and quiet, someone who blended into the background. But blending in didn't mean he was unnoticed. Jeffrey started acting out, pulling bizarre pranks and mimicking seizures to get a reaction from his peers. It was his way of seeking attention, even if it wasn't the kind he really needed. His behaviours took on a more disturbing edge. His fascination with anatomy evolved into a desire for control. He would capture small animals and experiment on them, as if rehearsing for something far more sinister. It wasn't just about curiosity anymore, it was about domination and power. At the same time, Jeffrey's struggles with his own identity began to surface. He realised he was attracted to men, but felt unable to express this in his conservative environment. This internal conflict added another layer of isolation, driving him further into his dark fantasies. Jeffrey's high school years were marked by increasing alienation and troubling behaviour. He began drinking heavily, even sneaking alcohol into class. Teachers and classmates noticed, but most dismissed it as a teenage phase. In reality, Jeffrey was using alcohol to numb his ever-growing inner turmoil. His bizarre behaviour also escalated. He once staged a mock epileptic seizure in the school cafeteria, leaving his classmates bewildered. While these antics earned him attention, they also isolated him further. People laughed, but no one really understood what was going on beneath the surface. In 1978, when Jeffrey was 18, his parents' marriage finally collapsed. Lionel and Joyce's divorce was messy, leaving Jeffrey alone in the family home for extended periods of time. This isolation, combined with the emotional neglect he'd experienced for years, proved to be one of the final events before Jeffrey would release his inner demons unto the world. By the time Jeffrey graduated from high school, he was adrift, with no close friends, no career ambitions, and a fractured family life. He spiraled further into an isolated world of dark fantasy. His first murder, committed shortly after graduation, marked a turning point in his life. It wasn't just an act of violence, it was the culmination of years of neglect, confusion, and disturbing impulses. His first victim was Stephen Hicks, a hitchhiker Jeffrey picked up under the guise of sharing a few beers before giving him a ride to his destination. What began as an attempt to stave off his loneliness ended in tragedy. Stephen Hicks was a 19-year-old who was hitchhiking his way to a rock concert. Dahmer noticed Hicks walking along the road and, feeling a strong desire for companionship, stopped to offer him a ride. Hicks agreed, and Dahmer invited him back to his house for a few drinks before the concert. Back at Jeffrey's house, the two drank beer, listened to music and talked. Dahmer, desperate to keep Hicks from leaving, became increasingly anxious when Hicks eventually expressed his intention to go. Unable to bear the thought of being alone again, Dahmer made a fateful decision. He struck Hicks from behind with a dumbbell, knocking him unconscious, and then took further, deadly actions to ensure Hicks could not leave. In the hours and days that followed, Dahmer attempted to cover up what he had done. He dismembered Hicks's body and disposed of the remains in a manner that he believed would prevent discovery. These actions were the culmination of Jeffrey's growing obsession and desire for control, combined with his profound fear of abandonment. This crime was a shocking escalation in Dahmer's behaviour. Up until this point, his disturbing tendencies had largely been confined to thoughts and fantasies. The murder of Stephen Hicks marked a tragic turning point, where Dahmer's inner demons finally manifested into real-world violence. It would be nearly a decade before his next victim, but this terrible event set the stage for the horrific crimes he would later commit. Looking back, it's clear that Jeffrey Dahmer's early life was riddled with warning signs. His obsession with death, his inability to form healthy relationships, and his reliance on alcohol to cope with his pain all pointed to a deeply troubled individual. But in the chaotic environment of his upbringing, these red flags were overlooked. Jeffrey Dahmer went on to commit some of the most evil, depraved, and horrifying crimes of the 21st century. His actions destroyed the lives of his victims, their families, and entire communities of people. He inflicted evil atrocities upon people that he thought would go unnoticed in marginalized communities. That said, Jeffrey Dahmer's story reminds us of the devastating impact that neglect, isolation, and unresolved trauma can cause on the human psyche. While understanding that his past doesn't even come close to excusing his terrible actions, it does provide crucial insights into how a person can descend into such darkness. Thanks again for watching. If you found this exploration insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Together we can continue to shed light on the terrible backstories that created some of humanity's worst monsters and try to understand the darkest corners of the human mind. And remember, behind every monster lies a story. Until next time.